All right, so hi everyone. Welcome to our fourth end of work cycle updates for stakeholders from the Project Surfliner team. So these updates were created in response to some stakeholder feedback that we received 4 work cycles ago, that it would be really helpful to hold just one big regular update meeting at the end of every work cycle to share what the Surfliner team has accomplished, as well as what is coming next. This was as opposed to the individual sprint reviews that we do still hold at the end of every sprint and post on the blog. But again, these updates are really intended for you, our stakeholders. And so if you have any suggestions about how today's update might have been more useful for you, please do feel free to share those suggestions with either myself at UCSB or Jessica at UCSD. So thank you again for coming today. We are going to try to keep this meeting both informative and also concise. So whether you're joining us today or watching this recording, we really do appreciate your participation in the Surfliner project. Next slide, please. All right, so this is today's agenda. We're going to start with just a brief work cycle recap, followed by updates for both Comet and Shoreline. Those are the 2 products that we worked on during this past work cycle, as well as our upcoming work cycle schedule, and then finally any questions that you might have for the team. Unfortunately, our substitute Comet tech lead for this work cycle, Matt Critchlow, is out sick unexpectedly today. So our Comet update is actually going to be somewhat abbreviated and is not going to include the formal demo that we had planned. However, once Matt is back in the office, we'll set up a time with him to record a formal demo, and then we can share that recording with you all via email. Tom Brittnacher, who is our product owner for Shoreline, is also out sick today and so will not be joining us. However, he was also on leave for most of this past work cycle, and so Amy Work, his substitute product owner, is going to be able to provide the full update. The other thing I want to mention is that we did roll out 2 new microservices during this work cycle that are named Tidewater and Super Skunk. Yes, those are also historic California train names. And our new team member, Margaret Kibbe, is going to be introducing those microservices as part of the Comet update. However, moving forward, we've decided that we want to manage all 3 of the current Surfliner microservices, both of these and also the AAAF service, Orange Empire, sort of as a holistic group. And so the current technical lead for Orange Empire, Matt Critchlow, and the PO, Michael Stewart, will be providing leadership for all 3 of these services moving forward. Next slide, please. And one more. All right, so this is just a recap of this past work cycle schedule. Just a reminder that we do try to schedule all of our work cycles in a 56-day on-off cycle with a 2-week buffer on each end. And that works out to be 4 sprints, a little buffer sprint, 4 local sprints, a buffer sprint, and then a new work cycle again. So this winter, the winter 2022 work cycle was held from January 19th through March 15th. During this work cycle, you'll see that Comet had 4 sprints. And this is, I think it was during sprint number 2 that Matt stepped in as the technical lead while Tamsin was out on parental leave. Congratulations again to Tamsin on your new little addition. And then Shoreline also had 2 sprints starting sprints 3 and 4 during this work cycle. And again, Amy Work graciously stepped in as the product owner while Tom Brittnacher was also on leave. So without further ado, if you could move forward one more slide, Amy, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, or not Matt, sorry, Gabriella, Tamsin, and also Margaret to give some Comet updates.
Thanks, Chrissy. As Chrissy mentioned earlier, Matt is out sick today, but he will be joining us once we get that recorded demo meeting happening. I too want to congratulate Tamsin on behalf of the Surfliner project team on the new addition to their family. How lovely that bundle of joy. I'm sure Tamsin will be glad to share pictures later on, right? But let me start off by talking about the Comet product, which is our staff-facing digital object management platform. While we formalize Comet's features list, we have yet to share it out to our stakeholders, but I think what I like to do is share out that link once we share out the URL to this recording. Before I pass this over to Tamsin to talk about the Comet workcycle focus and accomplishments, I want to also share that we're really excited to have our newest developer, Margaret Kibbe, here to help us talk about some of the accomplishments on this work cycle for Comet. Margaret joined in December and has been really, really quick to join in and start contributing to the work cycle here. Tamsin, are you ready?
I'm ready. I can't believe y'all missed the opportunity to welcome my new microservice.
Well done.
That's just a little systems architecture joke. Okay, can we advance the slide? So I'll just talk a little bit about what are the focus of the Comet parts of the work cycle were. The real key goal that we identified for this work cycle was building out integration between Comet and various other Surfliner services, which are sort of scare quoted here as public facing. So this includes discovery platforms where users actually access content, like users from the public actually access content. Shoreline is one of those for the geospatial services or for the geospatial content rather. And then there's also Spotlight, the exhibits platform, or Starlight rather, the exhibits platform. We have plans for various other discovery platforms that might have different points of interest and content focuses over time. So it really is our goal to have Comet serve as a central content management locale and be able to have changes that are happening through the Comet system, either curatorial changes or permissions changes or what have you, metadata changes, to have those sort of emanate outward towards those other services. Public facing is sort of in scare quotes because this also includes things like OAI feeds, right? Like if we're talking about getting content from the content management space, the staff-facing content management space, outward towards other systems, that's really in scope here. So there were a lot of questions about how we might approach this at the start of the work cycle. Things like how we decide when to publish content in that way. How do we track what's published where? What's the architecture for data sharing? And how do various services maintain metadata schema alignment and permissions and so on. So our goal in the first few sprints of this work cycle was to really answer those questions well enough that we could allow the Shoreline work to take those answers in hand as Shoreline works on its ingest strategies. So that was really the key Comet work cycle goal. We also planned to work on a few sort of loose end type things. Some of those include just the content, the sort of like what happens when we ingest content into Comet, file characterization and derivative generation and management are part of that picture. And then also we've reported out in the past on work related to metadata configuration and batch ingest, both of which are pretty far along in terms of how their feature development goes. but there's still not a huge amount of, they're still not sort of like implemented in production in either of the campuses. So there was some work that we plan to take on around those, in those areas, to make it more possible for the two campuses to actually take on ingest. So that's the sort of overall Comet work cycle goals. Can we do the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is the overall sort of working Surfliner architecture diagram. The whole bottom half here, with the exception of this, the wings, is what we've been calling in the past the Comet development scope. Some of our work happened in this like little green highlighted box for Comet itself. But where I really want to draw your attention as I get ready to hand things over to talk about what actually got done, is this this sort of middle upper boundary of the Comet development scope box, where we have a little dotted line that says future scope, which maybe needs to be updated, and inside that box is an event broker and a Comet metadata API. And this little boundary area is the space where a lot of our yeah, thank you for the mouse over. Yeah, this little boundary area is the space where a lot of our work was focused this sprint, or this work cycle rather. And the goal was very much to, again, answer enough of the questions about how content would move through this boundary from sort of management space to public access space. So that's sort of, again, where the work was focused. And let's go ahead and do the next slide now too. And I'm going to let Margaret update you on most of the Comet work, because as has been mentioned, I was sort of out of the picture for a little bit more than half of this work cycle. But I will say first that we've been tracking some upstream work in the Samvera community dealing with the derivatives generation. So the feature that's of interest here is when we ingest content, what we do is we save the exact original file that's uploaded. That might be something like a production master, or it might be something else depending on the particular type of content that's being handled. And then it's possible for us to add derivative content manually that's been produced through some other process. But one thing that we can do with Comet is trigger various background work to generate derivative content. The simplest example of this is to make downloadable versions of images, right? Like compact downloadable images of very large TIFF files or thumbnails. And the upstream platform that Comet is based on has some facility for this, but that didn't have support for the backend storage systems that we're using. And a lot of the work to make that support exist happened with a little bit of our attention, but mostly coming from other folks in the community during this work cycle. So we're super excited to be able to be working sort of off cycle on bringing that feature set into Comet. This is a place where we feel that our participation in the Samvera community is paying off. Okay, so with that, I want to hand it over to Margaret Keeby.
Yeah, thank you. So as Chrissy and Tamsin mentioned, we have developed a few new this work cycle of what we're calling microservices. One of those is SuperSkunk, which is our API service. We really hoped for Comet to be mostly staff facing and not the thing that is talking to all of our discovery platforms at the same time. So we developed SuperSkunk to be that thing to then talk to those discovery platforms. But it's a separate application that is still connected to Comet's database so that when things change in Comet, it gets those changes and then is able to talk to the discovery platforms and so forth and inform them of that. And there's a diagram on the next slide. Don't move to it yet, but I'll explain those connections in a bit. Right now, it only reads the title, but when I start talking about future work, we'll talk a bit more about other metadata that will go through SuperSkunk. That's all well and good, but we also needed a system to tell those discovery platforms that there is information for them to ask SuperSkunk about. So we implemented a messaging system so that you can click, there's a publish button, you can click a publish button on Comet, and then it will send a message out to all of these other discovery platforms to say, hey, there's an object here which you might be interested in. And then they can go and ask SuperSkunk for the information. Right now, that system is pretty much fully implemented for Tidewater, which is an OAI PMH application, which we developed this work cycle. Because Shoreline had a lot of complex questions, which weren't all entirely decided at the start of this work cycle, we decided to build Tidewater as a very simple OAI PMH service to get this work moving. And then once we have everything figured out for Tidewater, the hope is that we can add Shoreline support fairly easily on top of that existing work. So we added this publish button, which will send a message to Tidewater, and then Tidewater can then ask SuperSkunk for the information. And we implemented an access permission system into Comet so that Comet knows which publishing services should have access to which items and can display that information with links to the various services in the Comet view for the objects. We also did initial work on improving our Comet metadata model. I'll talk about this more when we get into future work because there's definitely more work to be done here. But right now, the existing metadata model is sort of what comes bundled with the upstream application that we use to build Comet. And we're going to be moving that towards M3, which is a Sambera metadata model that we think will be well suited to that purpose. Finally, there was a lot of operations work. In the first half of this work cycle, we were largely developing these different applications separately, but then in the second half, we did a lot of work on getting them all to work together because obviously something like SuperSkunk can't really stand on its own. It needs a comment with it, and then we need these other services to talk to it. So because these things can't stand on their own, we needed to do a lot of operations work, getting them all tied together and speaking to each other. So if we can move to the next slide, this is the diagram showing all of these things. In the top left, you have Tidewater, that's the new OAI PMH service. Tidewater is basically finished at this point. It doesn't have everything that we necessarily would need for everything that we might want to use it for. For example, Calisphere, I think, needs image thumbnails. We don't have image thumbnails yet. There's things like that that we could add to it. But as a basic OAI PMH service, it's pretty much complete. Right beneath that, you see a little node-enabled Rabbit MQ cluster. That's our messaging system. And then beneath that, you have Comet, and you can see the arrow goes from Comet to the Rabbit MQ cluster up to Tidewater, and then there's another arrow down to SuperSkunk, which is in the top of that little green box right there. So that was the bulk of the work that we did this work cycle, was getting that loop between Comet up through the Rabbit MQ cluster, up to Tidewater, and then back down to SuperSkunk to actually get the information, which is pulled from the metadata database of Comet. Getting that cycle completed is a lot of the work that we did there. The arrows over to Shoreline right now are mostly aspirational. We've done initial steps to get those in place, but that's largely our future work. If you want to move to the next slide, I can talk about that a bit. There are a few broad pieces of work which we still need to finish before everything is fully functional. The first one is we want authentication for discovery platforms. Right now, we don't really have an authentication service. So hypothetically, anybody could go and ask SuperSkunk for information about an item and then get that information back. That's not desirable. We want to make sure that SuperSkunk only tells discovery platforms about objects that they should know about. So until that's in place, we can't really turn this on in any production sense. We don't want just anyone to be able to ask about any object and get all of the information. The other thing is metadata mapping. As I mentioned before, right now it's just doing the title because that's very easy. Every object has a title, but we really want to have a metadata mapping system so that comments metadata, which we control, can be turned into something like an OAI feed, which has a very strict Dublin core vocabulary, and we don't have to do much work beyond just saying this metadata term should be mapped to this other metadata term. And then all of that gets taken care of for us. So once we have those two pieces in place, we should have everything that we need in order to move information from comment through SuperSkunk and then get it into Tidewater. And then once that is in place, we can do integration with Shoreline. So we had a number of useful conversations with the Shoreline team, and I'm sure when we get to Shoreline, we'll talk a little more about Shoreline's requirements in this respect, about what those workflows should look like and which things will be the same as what we've been doing with Tidewater and which things will be different. For example, where publishing happens in the workflow could be different between Tidewater and Shoreline. So we've talked about those and tried to anticipate some of the situations that might come up where those don't completely line up. Not everything is in place here. There's still some gaps that we need to work out, but we've made good steps there. So I think that's everything we have regarding comment. And now we're going to move to Shoreline.
Thanks. So Alex and I will speak on behalf of the Shoreline team while Tom is out. And so we actually had 2 of the 4 weeks dedicated to Shoreline. So Shoreline is really our geospatial discovery platform for geospatial data sets, maps, and other items. And so for this work cycle, we focused on onboarding UCLA, which was something that is new, I think, for the entire project. Surfliner piece is we're the product that has an additional institution on board. So we spent a fair amount of this time getting UCLA up to speed on the DevOps work and what that entails and getting them integrated. There's still more work that needs to be done, but they were actively able to participate in this work cycle, which was great. The other items that we focused on were enabling the download of original data sets. And so currently in our production and staging instances of Shoreline, we're able to access derivatives of those original data sets, which is great. But one of the things that we realized that original data sets provide us is access to the metadata of that object. And so it's not the object level metadata, it's the detail and the metadata that is associated with all of these shape files. Currently, right now, when someone downloads a derivative data set, they don't get that metadata with them. So enabling that original data set download was crucial. We also wanted to focus on ingesting geotiffs as another data format into Shoreline, and then doing some maintenance and updates of the Shoreline infrastructure. That was a big item. And then ultimately is what we heard from Comet, being able to support integration with Comet. So we have current workflows that we've developed. And what we spent actually some time within this work cycle flushing out as we had work cycles, we've had different iterations of them, but we ended up mapping out what is our current workflow and keeping in mind that this workflow works for both institutions currently, both UC Santa Barbara and UC San Diego. And so these are the workflows that we go through. We have 2 different products that we're ingesting. So we have a CSV and an ISO metadata, and we end up ingesting this as a package, and it goes into geodata, which is accessible by the end user. So we ended up outlining this full workflow and thinking this is what we currently have, with the concept of how do we migrate our current workflow into Comet and what do we need to change. So we mapped out our current one and then revisited that to say, okay, what changes? These green items down below are sort of the new items where we thought maybe we can integrate it into Comet, but the point of mapping out our current workflow and our possible workflow was really to have conversations with the Comet team and others to realize at what stage do we need to be ingesting our data sets. We do some preparation beforehand, and then at what stage do we ingest into geodata or Shoreline. I say geodata will be the public facing name that we use for the Shoreline product. So users and patrons will see geodata, and Shoreline is just the internal name. But so this is really starting the conversations, and there's still some work to be done on making this integration into Comet happen as both management and object storage. So this is great, lots of conversations. And if you have more questions on either of these diagrams, happy to explain this. But I think one of the crucial changes that we've also realized between the current workflow and the possible workflow is that with the addition of UCLA, that we are looking at possibly migrating to just a standard CSV as our integration into our ingest package. And why just using a CSV rather than a CSV plus an ISO file is that all of UCLA has their data in Dataverse, and so the creation of an additional ISO file would be more work. And so those are some of the next steps that we'll look at, but that will also change our ingest. So it's exciting to be able to think about the possibility and how we can more efficiently streamline our current workflow. But then in accomplishments, Alex, were you wanting to talk about this one?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about this. So like Amy said, we helped bring UCLA on board, involved them in some of our DevOps work in order to make sure that our deployment processes worked for their infrastructure. Each of our institutions, the way we deploy applications is a little different. So it's been an interesting problem to make sure that we're flexible enough that multiple institutions can deploy the same application in slightly different environments. So one of the aspects of that was how we deploy Solar, and UCLA helped us make our Solar configuration more flexible so that they have their own way of running their Solar search engine servers, and now they don't have to change how they work in order to run Shoreline. We also upgraded some components. A lot of the work this cycle is kind of not kind of visibly obvious because it was bringing things kind of up to date with the upstream work. So Blacklight and GeoBlacklight are some of the base applications that we build on top of for Shoreline. And so there have been some upgrades since we last pulled in changes. So part of the work was making sure nothing broke that we use, that everything could be upgraded smoothly. And by and large, it was. There was also an update to GeoServer, which is the Java-based application that is used for kind of storing and processing the shapefiles. And that took a little more work because the way that GeoServer is deployed had changed a little bit. So we had to tweak our own configuration to make sure that the system still ran without having to re-ingest objects or anything really disruptive like that. Then, like Amy mentioned with the data sets, we were able to accomplish that. We taught the system how to read an augmented CSV that included links to the original data set and display that in the UI so that users can get a direct link to the original object. Previously, there was only a derivative made available. GeoServer would take the shapefile and create a derivative that was reprojected. And so it was good, but it wasn't good enough. And so now we have the exact original made available when we want to. We also got some new metadata quality control scripts created by the San Diego team. So we're trying to kind of collect all of the tools that each institution uses so that we can share knowledge and not kind of reinvent the wheel. And so we brought some of their local scripts into the shared repository. We documented those common integration workflows, like Amy said, and we did not finish the GeoTIFF work, but that's going to be future work, but we did get some initial research done on how to do it. I think, Amy, unless you have anything else to add in terms of accomplishments, we were going to have a demo showing you how the original shapefile can be accessed. Unfortunately, we don't have a demo instance up and running. So instead you get a screenshot. This is what it looks like on a map page. There's now a new link available where you can click and download the original shapefile. So apologies for the lack of interactivity.
And I think, Alex, on this though, I mean, right, the functionality exists and it's up to each institution now to be able to populate that. And I think, you know, UC San Diego and UC Santa Barbara, there's still some work that needs to be done to be able to sort of get our data sets into that, like that original link where UCLA has that, so they'll be able to work from it right away.
Yeah. The reason we couldn't just show you our currently existing geodata portal is because the previously ingested objects did not have that original download specified, and so we're going to have to actually update what's in there in order to add this feature to our previously ingested objects.
Yep.
Next slide. What's next? So we're going to continue working with UCLA. They were able to get involved this sprint, but there's, I think, still more knowledge sharing that we can do to make sure that they are kind of fully equipped to contribute. Documentation has been kind of an ongoing concern that we need to make sure that everyone can dive in with as little friction as possible. GeoTIFFs, like I mentioned, is still mostly yet to be done. There's going to be a big update in the metadata area. The new GeoBlacklight version uses a metadata scheme called Aardvark that is going to require some changes to how we do things. Restricted data sets, I think the Comet team mentioned a bit of this, but it's also a concern on the Shoreline side. Currently, we don't have access controls configured. So right now, everything that's been ingested has been public access. Unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case, and we have to make sure that Shoreline knows how to restrict access when necessary. Various UI and UX improvements across the board. And again, there's further work to be done with integrating Comet. Does that cover everything, Amy?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, Tom and I have been capturing the Aardvark metadata already. So we've been capturing that in our processes, but it's really that next step of enabling it within the ingest process to be able to display or utilize those existing fields. So it'll be some work, but not as much as recapturing it for all of our data already. So
That's it for me.
Thanks, Amy and Alex. Next slide. Upcoming work cycles. So based on team feedback in our all hands meeting, we're currently experimenting with scheduling regular dedicated sprints while we are off work cycle for the dev team to focus on maintenance and upgrades to in-production products. We actually did something similar to this last year, and to address some outstanding DevOps, it seemed to work very well. So if this works out equally well, we'll probably adopt this as a regular practice going forward. Our next off-cycle sprint is scheduled to begin next Wednesday, April the 13th, and it's going to run until April the 26th. The focus of this sprint will be on our exhibits platform, which is Starlight. Then in June, we'll kick off our next full work cycle. Those dates are tentatively scheduled for June the 8th through August the 2nd. And the focus for this work cycle, excuse me, is yet to be determined. Next slide. And just a reminder that if you want to stay up to date with what the project team is up to, we have 2 Surfliner Slack channels, one for our day-to-day activities, and the Surfliner announces specifically for general project announcements. We also have our Surfliner blog with summaries of our sprint reviews, and you can always reach out to your campus project owners, Chrissy for UC Santa Barbara or Jessica for UC San Diego. Or you can reach out to the product owner of the specific product for which you may have a question about. Excuse me, and that concludes our recorded meeting for today. We have 15 minutes left, I believe, more or less, to go over questions. So if you feel obliged to type in chat your question, or you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question, we're all here to take any questions you may have regarding this. I realize it was a long demo, a long discussion, but I think it was very, very important to highlight all the fantastic work that was done in this work cycle. I'm looking in chat and I don't see any questions. Give you a couple more seconds to think about it. I hope these demos, these meetings, these end of work cycle stakeholder meetings that are recorded are helpful, especially if you can go back to your colleagues and share out once we share the link, that they're helpful in the sense that it gives you an idea of what this team is really accomplishing based on the goals set at the beginning of each work cycle, and to see that, you know, there is really, really good cross-campus development that's happening, and it's exciting work. So I hope you guys are getting something out of these recorded meetings. And with no questions, I think we can conclude this meeting. Again, thanks a lot to the Surfliner project team, and we hope to see you guys again after the next work cycle ends. Thanks, team. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today.